How can a Christian believer know that their salvation is secure? This is, again, one of the most important questions you can ask as a Christian believer. And today I'd like to do a follow-up video to the last one and look at another way in which you can know that your salvation is eternally secure. This is Eric Slay with the UWM Pen Guy, and this is the Bible Commentary. As always, if you liked what you're seeing, I would ask that you hit like and subscribe in order to help the channel grow. And now, without further ado, let's get into the Word. So, today we're going to look at Joshua 3, verse 11, and a follow-up example of the question of eternal security. This verse could have a lot of applications because we're dealing with what is the presence of God? How does it play out in the life of a believer? How can you know that the presence of God is with you? These are all questions that have obviously vast application and vast parameters behind them. But we're just going to focus on this one narrow area today. So verse 11 says, "Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you into the Jordan." So this comes after verse 10, where Joshua had said there was going to be God was going to give a sign that his people would know that his promises were going to be fulfilled. And it would be the parting of the waters of the Jordan, just as there had been the parting of the Red Sea for their fathers. Now here, we see that the presence of God will go before the people. The people were intended to look upon the passing of the ark here and gain confidence that God was going before them. Now, it's almost impossible for me not to allude to the Philistines capturing the ark, because this is literally exactly what the Israelites did in futility, not recognizing their sinful condition put them in such a different position from this generation. But I'm hoping to do another whole mini study on that by way of contrast with chapters 3 and 4 at some point. So I'll hold off on that until then. For now, we have the positive example. What? What do you need? What are you getting?
Nothing you should worry about.
Yeah, well, what are you getting?
Spoon.
A spoon?
Yeah.
Why are you getting a spoon?
I just want to see if it's... if I can figure out any new techniques with it.
Okay. See you later, dude.
See you later.
3, 2, 1. But here we then, of course, have the positive example. And so that the ark, which means God in a sense, would go triumphantly before the people. And this will continue when they reach the walls of Jericho, that they'll be carrying the ark, which means the presence of God will go with them around the city. Now, remember, or recall, if you're familiar with the Exodus account, that God had similarly manifested his presence in a pillar of cloud, leading the people supernaturally on their journey. So the question is, what does this have to do with our salvation? Well, it says in the book of Hebrews that Jesus is the captain of our salvation. He's the one who went before us. He's the one who went to the cross to conquer sin. And Paul says that Christ now holds a Roman triumph over the powers of darkness that orchestrate the world system that keeps people in darkness and keeps them bound to their sin, because it encourages them to love their sin, and it's the loving of their sin that keeps them bound to it. Now, what was a Roman triumph? It was when a victorious Roman conqueror would go back to the city of Rome, and he would march his war captives, the enemy leader, and some other captives from the battle through the streets of Rome. He would paint his face in order to signify that he was, it had something to do with one of the Roman deities, that he was taking on the guise of I think, the god of war on that day. And it was basically a triumphant procession that demonstrated the superiority of the Roman Empire over all of its enemies, and that this man was the embodiment of the power and might of Rome. And so Christ is the God of battles and the Lord of hosts, or the God of armies, who has taken captive the powers of darkness. Peter said that after he died on the cross, he went and proclaimed his victory to the demons that God had bound in hell because they were too evil and destructive, that if God had allowed them to continue to rampage across the earth as they had immediately before the flood, then it would be too much. They would get completely out of control and destroy the world. And so these are the kinds of powers that Christ holds his triumph over. And with Christ, the captain of our salvation, going before us for Christian believers, we can think about the very concept. If Christ is the captain of your salvation, if he has triumphed over the powers of darkness, if he's taken captivity captive, if he's ransomed a Christian back from the power of death, how can any of that be undone? That's nonsensical. It defies the very nature of the concepts themselves. And so for this and numerous lists of other reasons, many of which have to do with the very nature of salvation itself, like this one does, we see sort of an allegory here for the confidence a believer can have in the power of God to deliver them to final glory in heaven, solely by grace and solely through faith, solely in the finished work of Christ. And so, if you haven't accepted this free gift and experienced the transformation that inevitably comes from it, to have the power of God going before you in your life through the working of the Spirit in you, then I would implore you to do that today. This is Eric Slay with the UWM Pen Guy, and this has been the Bible Commentary.